I see Kali's logged in. How are you doing?
Are you talking to me?
No, there's someone else logged in, but they're muted, so maybe they haven't realized I was talking. But anyway, I've got to get the. I see Kali's logged in.
Oh,
How are you doing?
Here. Are you talking to me?
No, there's someone else logged in. I've gone in infinite regression. Yeah.
On the background thing.
All right, this is why I normally set this up first before I go into. There we go. Give it a few minutes to see how people are coming along. Oh, and we've lost my mom. Ah, technology. Just waiting to see who else shows up, because apparently it can be just as hard for people to arrive in person, just as hard for people to arrive by technology as it is for them to arrive in person. It's kind of a funny statement on life. We'll just give it to 12:05, and then I'm starting. Rain or shine. Oh, and my clock says 12:05. Good afternoon, everyone. It is nice to see you in this way. Hopefully, you've all found the link to the handout. Actually, I realized I forgot to send the link to the handout for the folks who are on Zoom. My apologies for that. Too many different buttons. So there's the handout. Those who are watching by YouTube already have the handout and Zoom link. If you'd like to join us in Zoom and participate more live, that is available through the YouTube. A reminder to our YouTube watchers who are watching this as it streams that there is a delay between the YouTube feed and the live, meaning that you'll be about 15 to 30 seconds behind where I am actually in the real world. And if it looks like I have moved on without answering your question, that's because I haven't seen it yet. When I get it, I'll be happy to chime in. So we are dealing with a double parasha this week, two parshiot, Behar and Buchukotai. We are wrapping up the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, and we are settling a few of the issues. You may remember, if you've been following through Leviticus, and you should have been, that the book is occupied with a great many of the laws that will be the focus of our people, and also many of the ways that we can repair breaches in those laws when we have committed them. What Leviticus has not covered so far is what happens when there is large, wide-scale dereliction of the Torah. What happens if we actually forsake the covenant? And on the contrary, what happens when there is large group observance of the Torah, of God's commandments? And so Buchukotai, which is what we're going to focus on tonight, this afternoon, is going to give us more information about that. However, I need to warn you up front that there is a difficulty with trying to read this section in translation, in particular, when that translation is English. Please just sit back and relax and allow me to explain a little grammar. Hopefully, I won't lose all my viewers. So in English, there is the first person, second person, and third person. The first person is when you're saying I, or when you say we, which means there is a first person singular and a first person plural. It is different whether it is singular or plural. In the third person, it's when you're talking about someone else, he, she, it, or they, which means, again, there is a third person singular, he, she, or it, and it is gendered in English, except for the neutral it, or they, which is not gendered because it's for any plural, but it is a third person plural. First person plural, I. First person singular, I. First person plural, we. Third person singular, he. Third person plural, they. Second person in English, however, did not get as much definition. Second person in English is you. It is to the person that you are addressing. And in English, if I'm talking to one person, I say you. And if I'm talking to many people, I say you. There is a little bit of a regional dialect that helps clear this up, with y'all in the South being referenced to one person and all y'all as being a reference to a plural group of people. However, most forms of English, and certainly most translations of the Torah, do not make that distinction, which means many people will read the parasha of Buchukotai as referring to them, as though God was talking to them singularly, when in fact, this chapter is focused on the you plural, the second person plural. What we are discussing here is a collective issue, not a singular issue. The bulk of the early parts of Leviticus was taken up with the single person's responsibilities, but Buchukotai primarily focuses on the collective responsibilities. And if you don't get that, then it's going to be really hard to understand this the way Judaism understands it. And to be quite frank, you're not understanding it the way God actually wrote it, because in Hebrew, there is a second person plural, and that is the conjugation form found throughout this section of the Torah. Okay, grammar class is over. Let's get down to work. Buchukotai. This is chapter 26, beginning with verse 3. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments. All right, so there are many different words for laws and commandments in Judaism. There are the chukim, which is the word that is being translated here as laws. There is also the word mishpatim, which sometimes is translated as statutes. And then there is the word mitzvah, or mitzvot in the plural, which is here being translated as commandments. As we're going to see, some of our commentators are going to make a deal out of the difference between what is a law, what is a commandment, and what are rules. So we will come back to that a little bit later. But we understand now we have this conditional opening. If we follow God's teachings, we'll use the generic Torah. If we follow God's Torah, then, verse 4, I will grant your rains in their season, so that the earth shall yield its produce and the trees of the field their fruit. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage, and your vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. If you're not a farmer, you may not realize that different plants are planted, harvested, and dealt with at different times of the year. But if you are a farmer, you would know that there are usually, in a non-bountiful time, there's usually gaps between these different sequences of the agricultural cycle. So what God is promising here is that the land will be so bountiful that you won't even be done with gathering in or handling one season's produce before the next season's produce has also ripened. You will be constantly awash in new food. Moving on, excuse me. I will grant peace in the land, and you shall lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land. A little aside, there have been numerous skeletons found from around the world of ancient people that were killed by animals. Most of us now live in relative security, apart from murder hornets, but most people never have to worry about being killed by an animal in most parts of the world these days, give or take certain parts that are still waiting for more development. But back in the day, yes, wild animals were a big trouble, and this blessing that God is describing here was a very significant blessing to be offered. You shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before the sword. 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 of you shall give chase to 10,000. Your enemy shall fall before you by the sword. Again, a statement of not just our strength, because it's not just our strength God is promising, but that there will be a fear of us in our enemies. They will recognize that God is clearly on our side, and that will mean that even a few of us can stop the attacks of a greater number. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply you, and I will maintain my covenant with you. You shall eat old grain long stored, and you shall have to clear out the old to make room for the new. It's a good thing when your storehouse is so full of old supplies and you're still making new supplies. There hasn't been a famine in recent time, that you're actually throwing away food because you have so much. This is something that many people nowadays do almost accidentally, and it's quite a shame. But this is trying to describe the blessing of plenty. I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out from the land of the Egyptians to be their slaves no more, who broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. That word erect is a bit of an interesting one. It's a hapaxlegomenon. It's a word that appears only once in the entire Tanakh, the entire Bible, right here in chapter 26, verse 13, komiyut. So the idea is that it comes from being lifted up or raised, and in context, it is interpreted as meaning that we will walk unbowed, that we will walk upright. Could also mean that we move to being homo erectus, but this is definitely talking about the future rather than the past. So I'm going to pause real quick, let people digest those blessings. I'm going to take a quick drink of tea, and that'll let people ask questions or make comments if they have them. All right, so we continue with our second person plural with talking to the group in verse 14. And if we had the if statement of if we do what God has asked, then it should not be surprising that we will have an if statement of if we don't do what God has asked. But if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, if you reject my laws and spurn my rules, so that you do not observe all my commandments and you break my covenant. All right, so this is the alternative condition. If we do what God has asked, then everything that we've described so far will come to pass if we, as a group, excuse me, I think someone forgot that I had a class. If you do not do what I have asked, then you will have problems. What are those problems? Well, verse 16 begins to lay it out. I in turn will do this to you. I will wreak misery upon you, consumption and fever, which cause the eyes to pine and the body to languish. You shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. So we're talking here about different illnesses, as well as the idea that between the time that we sow our crops and the time they are harvested, we will be overrun by our enemies, and they will be the ones to enjoy it rather than us. I will set my face against you. You shall be routed by your enemies, and your foes shall dominate you. You shall flee, though none pursues. So again, a parallel to our earlier idea that we could put to rout our enemies even when we were fewer in number. Now we are running from enemies, real and imagined, even though there may be no one there. That is how much fear will overtake us. And if for all that you do not obey me, I will go on to discipline you sevenfold for your sins. All right, so this is a deviation from the parallel that we had. Before it was, if you, collective group, do what I have asked, you will, collective group, receive these blessings. Now we have, if you do not, collective group, do what I have asked, you will have this challenge, this catastrophe. And if you continue to not do what I have asked, then there will be more catastrophes. So what we are seeing here is that it is a universal blanket promise for when we have observed Torah, but that there is a ever-increasing scale of discipline, if you wish, for those that are, for the group that is not following what God has asked. And we are talking here not just about a group, we are talking about the group, meaning the nation. I will break your proud glory. I will make your skies like iron and your earth like copper, which again, if you're a farmer, you do not want. So that your strength shall be spent to no purpose. Your land shall not yield its produce, nor shall the trees of the land yield their fruit. And if you remain hostile towards me and refuse to obey me, I will go on smiting you sevenfold for your sins. Continued another level of escalation. I will loose wild beasts against you, and they shall bereave you of your children and wipe out your cattle. They shall decimate you, and your roads shall be deserted, because no one wants to travel on a road when there are wild beasts waiting to attack you. Again, this is parallel to the blessing we saw before, where the wild beasts would be not attacking us. 23, and if these things fail to discipline you for me, and you remain hostile to me, I too will remain hostile to you. I in turn will smite you sevenfold for your sins. More escalation. I will bring a sword against you to wreak vengeance for the covenant. And if you withdraw into your cities, I will send pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into enemy's hand. Again, we have a threat of plague and war coming here. And I break your staff of bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in a single oven. They shall dole out your bread by weight, and though you eat, you shall not be satisfied. The idea here is that when you are creating your loaves, when you are separating out the grain into different portions, there will only be enough that even though 10 people are baking, that all of what they're baking can fit into a single oven, which shouldn't really be possible unless what they're baking is a tiny, tiny portion. And of course, when they eat it, it's not going to be enough. And the idea of measuring it out by weight would be equivalent to, in the modern lingo, saying that they are rationing it, that they're not just eating their fill, but they are deliberately not eating their fill, eating too little, in fact, to really stay healthy, but trying to stretch it as far as they can. But if, despite this, you disobey me and remain hostile to me, I will act against you in wrathful hostility. I, for my part, will discipline you sevenfold for your sins. You shall eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. We are talking about cannibalism here. I will destroy your cult places and cut down your incense stands, and I will heap your carcasses upon your lifeless fetishes, another word for idols. I will spurn you. I will lay your cities in ruin and make your sanctuaries desolate, and I will not savor your pleasing odors. This idea of riach nichoach is in general used for when God is talking about sacrifices. that it creates this idea of an aroma which shows our willingness to connect to God, even if we are doing sacrifices. If we continue to reject all of Torah apart from the sacrifices, God will not accept those sacrifices. It will do nothing. All right, we go on through the rest of this section with more and more desolation and more problems. We hear that the land will get its sabbatical rests, its years of resting that we have been neglecting for it, and eventually we will be brought back all the way at the very end. Those of you who are verse 39, those of you who survive shall be heartsick over the iniquity in the land of your enemies. More they shall be heartsick over the iniquities of their fathers. They will regret, we will repent what we had done and what our ancestors had done. And they shall confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers, in that they trespassed against me, yea, were hostile to me. Again, as we'll see, we're not only talking about making mistakes. The whole first section of Leviticus is about what to do if you make mistakes. This is about open hostility to God, not merely errors in how we observe. When I in turn have been hostile to them and have removed them into the land of their enemies, then at last shall their obdurate heart humble itself, and they shall atone for their iniquity. Then I will remember my covenant with Jacob. I will remember also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. And God then talks about bringing us back into the land eventually. Okay, so pretty heavy stuff. It is especially poignant at the moment as we are dealing with a global plague. But again, as a reminder, as I've said many other times, those who wish to point to certain verses and claim that they point to certain current events are invariably wrong and almost always selling something or simply trying to exploit you in some other ways. The idea that any particular catastrophe can be pointed to without the aid of a recognized and properly vetted prophet is something that Judaism rejects. And since we do not have a prophet that has predicted our current predicament, we do not have to and should not attribute it as a fulfillment to any particular verses that we're reading. So what are we to make of these verses? What are they intended to teach us? Well, that means we need to look at some commentary. And as I switch over, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to pipe up. Just adjust the screen a little bit for my reading. Okay, hopefully everyone can now see our commentary. This is from Ramban, from Nachmanides, one of the great rabbis that came out of Spain during the time of the expulsion. All right. All of these blessings, meaning the beginning section that we saw from verse 3 on, many as they are quite general. Rain, peace, plenty, fertility, unlike the blessings previously given. In earlier sections of the Torah, for example, Exodus 23, you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will remove sickness from your midst. Those are a little bit more precise, whereas the blessings of this chapter are more generic. They don't seem to have the same level of precision. Having healthy food and no illness, we would be able to reproduce properly and live out our full lifespans. That seems to be what was discussed. The point is that though these blessings are indeed miracles, they are hidden miracles. The Torah is full of such hidden miracles, which apply even to single individuals who serve him properly. So this idea that if you serve God, he'll bless your water, he'll give you health, that those are individual miracles. Well, those are miracles for you, but no one else can tell that they are miracles. So, Mr. Smith has a nice job and Mr. Smith is not suffering from a particular disease. He might be blessed or he might be lucky. It is hidden within the natural order of things that the individual might be able to prosper in a way that is a result of their actions, but there is no way to uncover that it is it's indistinguishable from simply being a feature of the natural world. However, the blessings in this section, by contrast, are general, applying to the people as a whole and depending on all of us to be righteous. Now, before we go on with how he explains this, just realize what he's saying here is that a general blessing that applies to everyone is going to be considered more miraculous than a blessing that applies to only an individual. And this is what he tries to explain. This is why they constantly refer to the land, meaning that it's for the whole land, not only for certain individuals. Again, all of these blessings are miraculous. It is not natural for the rains to always come in season, for there to be continual peace, for enemies to always panic. And certainly it is not natural for the exact opposite of these things to happen if we sow our fields in the 7th year, meaning as if we have violated that part of Torah. So you might think, well, how could we notice that the miracles were happening? If I can't tell the difference between Mr. Smith being prosperous and Mr. Devil being prosperous, then how can I tell that this is also a miracle? And the answer that Ramban is giving is because miracles don't happen like this on large scales all the time. And if they are going on all the time, it will be extremely noticeable. And the opposite, if it is always going on that there are catastrophes, then yes, that will also mean that something of significance is occurring. Let me just scroll down to make it easier to read. Even though these are hidden miracles taking place as part of the natural course of events, their being constant and reliable throughout the entire land reveals their miraculous nature. For if a righteous person is granted a long and healthy life, the same thing might happen by chance to a few wicked people. But if an entire land and an entire people always have the proper amount of rain falling at the proper time, the mere fact that such a phenomenon is unknown anywhere else in the world would make clear that it is the Lord's doing. So he is trying to make sure that we understand why this generic blessing of peace and prosperity is such a blatant, miraculous promise, and why, of course, that it would need to be of miraculous magnitude for us to recognize that it was occurring. It simply doesn't happen that you end up with one area that everyone within it is benefiting in this supernatural way of peace and abundance. The curses and punishments, of course, are the exact opposite of the blessings, falling upon the land and upon the people as a whole, and their miraculous nature will be equally evident. To put it plainly, when Israel is wholehearted and numerous, untrammeled nature has no effect whatsoever on them, not on their land, not on the people as a whole, and not on any individual among them. This is an extremely strong statement and very controversial. There are many commentators who disagree, but it's important to make sure we bring different opinions. So what he is saying is that if Israel as a nation, meaning all of the children of Israel, not just that particular area in the Middle East, are behaving according to Torah and wholehearted in their connection to God, then nature cannot touch them. Right? Nature won't be able to touch us. The natural order of things will be suspended for the nation as a whole's benefit. And he goes on to give a very specific example. They have no need of doctors or medicine, for I, the Lord, am your healer, Exodus 15. In the time of the prophets, meaning during the books of the prophets that we have in our Tanakh, if righteous people would commit a transgression and get ill, they would not call a physician, but a prophet. When King Hezekiah fell ill, he sent for Isaiah. By contrast, King Asa, who was not exactly a good person all the time, did not turn to the Lord, but to physicians, and that's found in 2 Chronicles. What need of physicians would those who do God's will have once he promised he would remove sickness from their midst? The physician's role would be limited to advising them about proper diet. So what he is saying is, in a time when there is a wholehearted connection, then there should be no need for a physician, because we can easily fix any of our mistakes that might have brought about a particular illness, and the individual is able to remedy that through their revelation of the problem by consulting with the prophet and then remedying their misbehavior. There is no need to go to a doctor. The only thing the doctor would tell you is, how to eat healthy. What should you eat? What should you avoid eating? However, I should point out, this is where it begins to have difficulty and where other commentators take issue with Ramban's very, very expansive understanding of this idea. They say, but why would you need a doctor to even tell you what to eat? If God is going to keep you healthy, if God is the one who is going to protect you, then surely you should be able to do and eat anything you want, as long as you're being righteous and wholehearted in your connection to God, and suffer no ill effects. Right? So if you want to eat only candy bars, that should be fine as long as you are a good and righteous person. This is really where it begins to be very problematic. But it has some very interesting ideas, because even Ramban, who had this idea that there was a time when this was the case, recognizes that in his day, it is not the case. If things had remained as they should be, people would become ill only as a result of sin and would be healed as God wills. But since they became accustomed to medical treatment, God lets nature take its course. That is why the Exodus verse requires the assailant to pay for the cure. For the Torah does not base its rulings on miracles. But when the Lord is pleased with a man's conduct, he need have no truck with physicians. So if we lived in this ideal state, then yes, we would not need to go to the doctor. Since we do not, and since the Torah knew that we would not, the Torah itself mandated using healing. The Torah says that yes, in theory, it is possible to maybe be able to rely on God for healing, but that would mean relying upon a miracle for yourself, since the rest of the world is relying upon physicians, and therefore you too must rely upon physicians. This is one of the reasons why you do not see a large number of Jews who refuse to take medical treatment. Almost all of the communities that I know, except for the most fringe and bizarre splinter groups, say that going to a doctor is not only a good idea, but is a requirement if there is anything that you can do to improve your health. And then he's going to just do a conclusion. And if you've got a question in YouTube, start getting it ready, and I'll pause after we finish his conclusion. This is the straightforward sense of the covenant, the brit between us and God. And it is the truth. And he certainly will do exactly this, meaning establish a world with that level of blessing. The text says nothing explicit here about the continued existence of souls in the world of souls, the world to come, after the resurrection of the dead, because their continued existence in that realm is intrinsic to their nature, meaning God is not promising a reward in the hereafter, because living in the hereafter is what souls do, and therefore it does not need to be discussed in this particular verse. The aware, those who are knowledgeable in his opinion, understand that our passage alludes to both the Garden of Eden and to the world to come, meaning to the next levels of human existence. But these blessings are not to be entirely fulfilled until all Israel does the will of their Father, when heaven and earth achieve their perfect original form. There are no blessings in the Torah as perfect as these. Know that Israel has never yet achieved these blessings in their fullness. We'll pause there for reflections, questions, before moving on to another way to understand this discussion of what God is promising. Everybody's too overwhelmed, I see. Well, that's fine. Let's go ahead and continue. All right, so this next passage may sound familiar if you've ever bothered to read the translations that are found in the Siddur. And bring us in peace from the four corners of the earth, and lead us upright to our land. For you are a God who makes salvation. You have chosen us from all peoples and tongues, and have brought us near to your great name, forever in faithfulness, that we might give thanks to you and proclaim your oneness in love. Now, this is taken from the prayer known as Ahava Rabbah. Ahava Rabbah is recited each morning as one of the companion prayers to the Shema. In fact, it is the prayer said immediately before the Shema, which is why its ending is here talking about our proclamation of God's oneness, which is one of the main points of the Shema, and in love, which of course is the Ve'ahavta's main theme to begin with. But if you look at the beginning, and bring us in peace on the four corners of the earth and lead us upright to our land, that word upright is the same word, commute, which is found as the translation erect in our earlier translation from our verse 13 in this chapter. And since that word is unique to that verse, we can know that the author of this prayer was deliberately thinking about this section of the book of Leviticus and trying to remind us of that section. But then we can look at what this author is saying was the idea behind that blessing, which is that we would be brought back from the four corners of the earth, again, found at the very end of the listing of curses, and that we would come back upright to our land, that would be our ultimate deliverance. And of course, for most of the last 2,000 years, this was something that we could hope for, but not experience very much individually, not until 1948 and the establishment of Israel. And Sifra, one of the earliest Midrashic collections, points this out quite clearly, that this komiyut, this idea of being upright, was specifically meaning erect in stature due to relief from bondage. That the ultimate salvation that we were looking for was not necessarily a miraculous state of existence like Ramban was imagining, but was simply no longer being subjugated and forced to suffer in exile among other nations, which often treated us very, very badly. But we need to still come back to Ramban, because I think he has a very good understanding of what exactly does it mean when those curses happen. What are we doing that is so wrong? Like I pointed out, the whole first section of Leviticus talks about our mistakes. The whole section of Acharei Mot talks about Yom Kippur, when we are purging ourselves of our sins. Clearly, God expects that we will commit transgressions. Clearly, God expects that we will make mistakes. We have entire law codes that are dedicated to dealing with our mistakes and the mistakes of others in our community. So how do we trigger this horrific set of curses? What has to be going on for that to happen? Ramban, we turn to again. Since the laws, as opposed to the rules, are commandments whose purpose is not obvious to the masses, there are fools who reject them. What's so important to God about my not wearing this beautiful garment because it's embroidered with fine linen and blue wool? The issue here is what is known as shatnez, the idea that you are wearing a mixed woven garment. What possible good can it do to us to burn a red cow and sprinkle its ashes on ourselves? Right? The para aduma, the red heifer, was used as a way of cleansing people from spiritual impurity that had come from contact with the dead. And, you know, it does actually seem for a lot of people that these are a little crazy. Does God really care what I eat? Does God really care what I wear? Does God really care about this niggling impurity thing? And those chukim, these particular these particular laws, as this translation holds them, would often confuse people. And then people would reject them, thinking that if I can't understand it, it's not worth knowing. So Ramban says, yes, there is that. But if you'll notice, we talk not only about people rejecting the laws, these things that are not immediately obvious, but also the rules. And that he goes on to discuss in the next section. But the logical basis of the rules for ordering society is obvious, right? Wearing certain clothes, sprinkling certain ashes, that is not obvious to the average person. But most of the rules are. Everyone is happy with them and agrees that such rules are needed. You will find no settlement among any people that does not have such a set of rules. No one could spurn such sensible rules as he who fatally strikes a man shall be put to death. You have to have punishment for murderers, which finds or a society which finds a man who accidentally causes a woman to miscarry. If somebody is in a fight and they accidentally hit a woman and she miscarries, there needs to be a monetary fine. You would not say, oh, well, there's no problem. Or the rules of adjudicating cases like that of the goring ox, creating a public nuisance, or the responsibilities of someone who has another's good in his possession, and the like. Meaning, all of these basic rules are necessary for a well-ordered society, and indeed every society in the world deals with these issues in one form or another. There's no society in the world that says, if your animal damages my animal, there's nothing we can do, it just happens. Every society has come up with some rule of how to handle that situation, and so to all of these other issues. So clearly these do seem to have a logical basis, even if some of the specifics are different than Judaism. The impetus, the intrinsic drive within humanity to create something to do with these issues seems to be very, very powerful. But the wicked are disgusted with our enforcing the rules. They spurn them not because the rules are irrational, but because they do not wish to observe them. Breaking the covenant means not merely spurning the rules, but living without Torah entirely. What Ramban is hinting at here, or saying explicitly, depending upon how much you can read it with his intonation, is that to truly spurn Torah, to truly reject Torah, doesn't just mean to say, this is, I don't quite understand. It's to say, I understand, and I still don't want to do it. Right? I understand that murder is wrong, but I don't think that rule should apply to me. Right? I understand that returning lost property is right, but I don't think that rule should apply to me. And when you would ask them, well, what rule should apply to you? The answer is whatever I want. Right? They want no Torah. They want no instruction at all. It's not that they are just unhappy with what God gave them. They are unhappy with the idea of being bound by laws and rules in any shape or form that inhibits them from doing what they want to do. Those are the people that God is describing as those who reject Torah entirely. And I can say that historically, it is very rare to find a society that has that as a dominant mentality. Remember, we're talking about a collectiveness here. So you would need to find a society like the Northern Kingdom in the late First Temple period and the Southern Kingdom at the end of the First Temple period that completely rejected the idea that any rule should apply to me. Most societies will quickly fall apart if that is the point that they reach. Moral decay doesn't mean replacing old rules for new rules, although there definitely are reasons not to do that in many cases. Moral decay means rejecting the concept of rules, even those that are so logically obvious that every society in the world has come up with some way of handling them. And what Ramban is trying to drive home here is that God is not expecting us to be perfect. God is not expecting us to avoid any mistakes. God is simply expecting us to acknowledge that these rules are desirable, that we should hope and pray that there would be good rules in our society and our community, and that by recognizing that there should be good rules in our society, we should strive to live up to them and live by them. And if we trip and if we fail, well, that's part of being human. But as long as you recognize that the rules are needed and you are needed to be in connection with them, then you are not one who hates Torah. You're just somebody who makes mistakes. And that's part of being in the human society. Give another little pause for questions or comments before moving on to the next section. Anyone else? Questions, comments? All right. I just wanted to finish with something that was a little bit more, well, partly lighthearted. This whole idea of there are things that do not seem logical at first, or that make fools scoff at the idea of Torah as well, which, by the way, is usually the beginning of a person rejecting any rules altogether. And there's a section here from Sanhedrin 100a and the Talmud, and it's dealing with the quote from Isaiah 54:12 that says that God is going to be rebuilding the walls and they will be made of carbuncles, which is my favorite word to work with bar mitzvah students on, because, of course, no one knows what a carbuncle is. It's basically a fancy word for a gemstone. So this special kind of gemstone is going to be used to create the gates of the Jerusalem in the days of redemption. Said Rabbi Yochanan, the Holy One, blessed be he, is destined to bring jewels and pearls that are 30 cubits by 30 and will cut out openings from them 10 cubits by 20, setting them up at the gates of Jerusalem. All right, so he's saying, yeah, literally, there will be giant gems, right, and pearls, things that are massive. Remember, 30 cubits is about 45 feet. So these things are going to be enormous, and there will be cut out openings in them as our gates. A certain disciple ridiculed him. Well, jewels even the size of the egg of a dove are not available. So will jewels of such dimensions be found? So he's saying, look, wait. If you want to go down to the gem market and look for a diamond, or a ruby or anything else, try finding one even the size of an egg. Right? They just don't grow on trees. And you're telling me it's not going to be that big. It's not going to be that big. It's going to be bigger than a house. It's going to be 45 feet tall. That's ludicrous. Right? It's simply physically impossible. After a while, meaning this disciple's ship, went out to sea. He saw ministering angels engaged in cutting up jewels and pearls 30 cubits by 30, on which were engravings 10 by 20, meaning they were marking out where the door was going to be cut. He said to them, "For whom are these?" They said to him, "The Holy One, blessed be he, is destined to set them up at the gates of Jerusalem." So he has a mystical experience while he is out traveling. And while he is having this experience, he is able to see the gates that are under construction that will be there for the days of redemption. And he is able to engage in conversation with these angels. And they confirm that, yes, this is exactly what is going to happen. The man came before Rabbi Yochanan and said, "It is truly fitting for you to give an exposition, for just as you said, so I myself have seen." All right, so he comes back and he is apologetic. He says to Rabbi Yochanan, "You know what? You're absolutely right. I've seen it with my own eyes through this vision, the gates being built. Way to go. Your interpretation is excellent, spot on, yada, yada." He said to him, meaning Rabbi Yochanan responded, "Empty-headed idiot. If you had not seen, you would not have believed. So you ridicule the teachings of the sages." He set his eye on him, and the student turned into a heap of bones. We'll hold off on the bones for just a second, but let's make sure we understand what the main thrust of what Rabbi Yochanan is saying here. He's saying, to say, "I've seen it with my own eyes, so now I believe it," is to say, I will mock that which is taught by the sages if I have not seen it myself personally. That rejection of the expertise and the insights of the sages is a dangerous thing. Not just dangerous for the community, although it's impossible to have laws and judges and to be a community unless you are willing to accept the rulings and guidance of experts. But it is dangerous as well because it breaks down our ability to understand and to internalize things that we have not yet personally experienced. You would not expect a child to understand the long-term consequences of eating only candy bars because they have not lived long enough to experience it. Their body has not experienced it yet. Yet we would not let that child only eat candy bars simply because we know what the long-term effect is going to be. And if the child was to tell us, "You know, I ate 30 candy bars yesterday and I got sick. Now I know that I shouldn't eat candy bars. You were right, Mom." Then you should say, "Don't be an idiot. Listen from what I am teaching you. Don't have to suffer through it yourself, or don't think you should wait before benefiting until you have been able to experience it yourself." We don't expect people to go to medical school before they listen to doctors. We don't expect people to go to law school before they listen to a lawyer. We don't expect people to go to the training to become a fitness instructor before recognizing the benefits of exercise. These are things that we should be willing to accept without that firsthand experience. The same way that we also should accept not wearing clothes that are made of the mixed materials, not going to the temple during impurity when had to be sprinkled. This is the temple of the days of the ancient world, not modern temple Israel. Please come once we open up again. You shouldn't need to experience these things firsthand to accept them. This is something that you should accept because you accept the true testimonies of people who are coming before you. And that is, I think, probably the best interpretation then of this heap of bones reading. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav argues that what this idea is that it's not that he turned him into a heap of bones, but that he saw through to his bones. That is to say, he saw through to the core of this person, and he revealed it for all that were gathered there when the student confronted him in the middle of the room. Notice that he only did this when the student returned and was engaging in this conversation. He didn't call the person an idiot when they objected in the first place. It's only when they come back and are now doubling down on their idiocy while thinking themselves wise that Rabbi Yochanan had to expose the deep flaw, the core, the root flaw, if you will, of what this person has done, to strip them bare so that everyone can recognize this is a catastrophe if that is how you are structuring your thinking of the world. And we'll wrap it up there, but I'm going to wait a little time for questions or comments. I need to get like a little stopwatch so I can keep track of how much time has elapsed from when I say it's time for questions and comments, so that I can know when the YouTube folks are getting ready. By the way, if you are on YouTube and you want to join Zoom, please use the link. And if you are on YouTube and you know you have a question, even though I haven't finished talking, go ahead and type it in, and then I will catch it out of the corner of my eye on the YouTube comment list, and I will try to answer it as quickly as possible. You don't have to wait for me to break. And it might take a little bit longer for me to get to it, but then we avoid these awkward silent moments where I'm sitting here going, I wonder if anyone has anything they'd like to say. Of course, one advantage of being a rabbi is that you can always keep talking. That was one of the bits of advice that I got in rabbinic school, which is always have something to say. If they say, Rabbi, would you like to say a few words? Rabbi, do you have anything you'd like to share? Never say no. If they're willing to listen, if they're willing to let you talk, talk. All right. Well, with that then, thank you all very much for joining me to this afternoon. A reminder, the Mishnah class will be on this evening at 7 to 8, more or less. We are in Masechet Eruvin, and there will be the Pathway to Judaism class tomorrow, beginning at 6 p.m. You're welcome to email, text, WhatsApp, whatever you need if you have questions or need more information. Take care and be safe, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.